Um, let me just press continue here. Okay. So, but did you know that 66% of relationship conflict is about perpetual problems, right? Wow, that's a lot, right? And that seems to be the hardest um, conflict to resolve. So all couples have perpetual problems. They stem from a couple's fundamental differences we've already talked about. They're either fundamental differences in your personalities, in your life experiences, in your gender differences and expectation differences, and that repeatedly create conflict. So instead of trying to solve perpetual problems, which um, is it's pretty much next to impossible to do. What is really important is whether or not a couple can have a dialogue about them. If they cannot talk about it, the conflict becomes gridlocked. Okay. And gridlock conflict eventually leads to emotional disengagement or disconnection. So let me briefly explain the difference between a solvable problem, a perpetual problem, and a gridlocked perpetual problem. So solvable problems can be about things like domestic things like house cleaning, parenting, disciplining children, sex, in-laws. It's essentially about something situational. The conflict is simply about that topic, and there may not be a lot of like a deeper meaning behind each partner's position, and usually a solution can be found and maintained. A perpetual problem, on the other hand, they're problems that center on fundamental differences, right? All couples have these problems. These are problems that a couple will return to over and over again. Gridlocked perpetual problems are problems that have been mishandled, okay, and have essentially, um, what's the word, calcified into something uncomfortable. How do I say? Um, that create a lot of hurt feelings. Okay. When a couple tries to discuss a gridlock issue, it can feel like they're spinning their wheels, they're not getting anywhere. And it can be really, really frustrating, right? What matters is not solving perpetual problems, but rather the the emotion, the affect with which they are discussed. The goal should be to establish a dialogue about the perpetual problem that communicates um, non-judgment, acceptance of your partner, and you can use humor, affection, understanding to actively cope with the unresolvable problem, then allowing it to fall into a gridlock position, right? Because it's going to come up all the time. You're not going to change your personality, right? So gridlocked discussions um, really only lead to painful fights, exchanges, or drift, and almost always involve the four horsemen, which is criticism, contempt, stonewalling, and defensiveness. I sent you a booklet on, I think, the very first session. In this session, I've included kind of the same thing, but it's kind of like a little cheat sheet. So it's a one sheet thing that you can post somewhere just to remind yourself about keep yourself in check with your behaviors. So I'd like you to learn how to identify solvable problems versus perpetual problems in your relationship, and if they have um, come to be or become gridlocked. And I've provided also, and Amanda has all of these resources that she's going to post with a couple of exercises that will help you do that, identify that in your own time. Okay, we're not doing that today. We'll post this resource, like I said, in the chat somewhere, so you can have access to that. So here's a series of characteristics common to gridlock problems. And again, you won't find this in your workbook. This checklist will help you to determine whether or not you have reached total gridlock in any of kind of those infuriating, repetitive problems you might have in your relationship. And we will also look at ways to start communicating about them. So the first one, the conflict leaves you feeling rejected by your partner. No matter how much you talk about it, and despite your best attempts, you make no headway in the problem area. You become so impossibly entrenched in your positions that neither of you really plan to budge, right? Um, Maybe some stubbornness in there, right? Anytime the subject comes up, you feel frustrated and hurt. Your conversations about the problem are generally unpleasant, without affection, generally with strong emotion. Your ability to budge increases with time, and which causes the two of you to hurt each other even more when this conflict arises. And as you hurt each other, your inability to budge and polarization in your view increases, and your chances of reaching a compromise decreases. So the outcome is, guess, emotional disengagement and disconnection and loneliness. But the good news is that there is a way out of gridlock. Okay, so no matter how entrenched in it you feel, there is a way. As Dr. John Gottman explains, all you need is the motivation and the willingness to explore the hidden issues that are really causing the gridlock. Okay, so the key is to uncover and share with each other the significant personal desires and dreams you have for your life, right? It's in those unrequited dreams, those dreams that are not shared dreams. Um, it's in those dreams that are at the core of every gridlocked conflict. In other words, the endless argument symbolizes some profound difference between the two of you that needs to be addressed before you can put the problem in its place by openly and honestly communicating about it. And this is hard work. This is the hard work of marriage, the hard work of going deeper into the thought life and the emotional life of your partner. And this is where real intimacy is born and nurtured. So conflict is really not a bad thing, right? You can see that it actually brings people together. It doesn't necessarily need to push them apart. So if we go back to the forest fire analogy, there's a spark that we need to deal with, and now we have a choice. So we can come to the issue with a bucket of water or a bucket of gas. Okay, that's a good picture. Um, which one are you going to use, water or gas? Are you going to pour gas on the spark, or are you going to pour water on the spark? You can guess what would happen if you pour one or the other, right? So on page 5, choose your bucket, okay? Going down the list, water is when, let's look at the first one. Water is when you are able to express what we are able to express what we need. A bucket of gas is when we can only express our emotion, okay? Uh, I know that I'm angry. I recognize that. I can express my anger. I can express my sadness. I can express my frustration. We do a good job of that. But more than that, we need to learn to ask for what we need. And that really changes things. That's the bucket of water, right? Here's what's happening in a conflict. It helps to understand what's happening in the brain a little bit. So when let's see, oh here, when we experience strong emotions like anger, when our um I mean, you know what that feels like when your heart rate increases, we start getting flooded and kind of worked up. Here's what's happening. All the blood is rushing from the front part of the brain, the prefrontal cortex of our brain, which is where all of our language, our conscious thought, our rational thought is located. All the blood starts leaving that area of our brain and goes to the limbic part of our brain. Okay, and that's the part where we feel strong emotion. It's where our fight or flight or freeze reflexes are. It's where our patterns and habits are stored. We move to that area, and what actually, like, really literally happens if we go fully limbic, as some people um, say, is we lose our inability to think straight and even speak clearly, right? Where anything you say after that really will not make any sense and will not be good. So, have you ever been so angry that you can't even find words? Like, have you ever experienced that? Probably. I have. And here's the problem with that. It is we can't actually ask for what we need or even articulate um, uh, uh, anything really, because we are so mad, or anything healthy because we're so mad. So we need to learn how to calm ourselves down, self-soothe, right, and go back to our rational brain. But here's the thing, it only takes about 90 seconds to go from rational to limbic. Okay, right? I mean, you can go from 0 to 100 pretty quick when you're angry, but it takes about 90 minutes, an hour and a half, to go from limbic to rational, right? So it really takes us a while to calm down and reactivate the thinking, logical part of our brain. So we need to ask ourselves, why am I so angry? Why am I sad? Why am I frustrated? What do I need right now? Right? So that's a bucket of water. But it might require that we take, excuse me, a timeout. In the resources, I've also included how to do this and what the thinking is around timeout, taking a timeout. And this is how you do it. Now, I just want to say that you should never, ever put your partner on timeout, right? You don't do that. That's not good. You put yourself on timeout, okay? And it has to be done roughly in this way. Doesn't have to, it's not a prescription, but there are certain elements that are really important. So when you feel like you're in that place and you know what that is, right? Because you can feel it in your body, you have to be very aware of what's happening in your body. When your heart rate increases, when you start getting, some people say hot and sweaty, when you begin to shake sometimes, some people even stutter, spit. um, um, when you're having trouble, putting your thoughts together and articulating, you know that at this point, you can't say anything that's going to be good. So you turn to your partner and say, I'm feeling flooded right now. I can't think clearly. So I want to talk, to talk. So I don't want to talk right now. But I understand that this discussion is really important and it's important to you. So it's important to me. So I'm just going to need to take a time out right now to calm myself down. And you can say, I'm going to go for a walk, or I'm going to go to the bedroom, or whatever. And for however long that you decide that will work, and I will come back. We will resume this conversation, and you need to let your partner know when that's going to be. All right. So, but here's what you don't do, right? You don't just simply withdraw, abandon the conversation, walk out, storm out, right? I've had it, I'm done. You've heard those things. Don't leave in a huff, don't bang things, uh, don't do that to your partner, because if you do, imagine if your partner, well, first of all, your partner is going to respond also with anger. In fact, maybe you've experienced this, or somebody that does this. They might even go after you and demand that you stay and continue the fight or the conversation, because now it's no longer discussion, right? It's a fight. And if we go even a little deeper, your partner may feel abandoned, right? And imagine if your partner has had a past trauma in their life, and now you just abandoned them, right? Just like their father did, or like their mother did as a child, or whatever trauma that might be. Now you have triggered them, and it becomes a very vicious and painful cycle. And this seminar is not going to be on trauma. I mean, I could talk about trauma all day, but we don't have time for that. So, so here's the key to a timeout. It's important that you come back to the issue, right? You can't just simply use a timeout as an avoidance tactic. So these are the elements of a timeout. Okay, so be aware of how you're feeling physically and emotionally. Communicate how you're feeling in the moment to your partner. Communicate that the discussion is as important to you as it is to your spouse. Announce that you need to take a timeout, and finally let your partner know when you're going to come back. So you have to promise that you're going to come back and stick to it. Don't sweep it under the rug and think that if you tuck it away, it'll just go away, because it inevitably will come back to haunt you, and sometimes in even bigger ways. So unresolved conflict that stacks up, right? That is compounded by more unresolved conflict will always cause resentment and drift. Okay. They have discovered that you can short circuit your brain. Um, you can shorten that 90 minutes that your brain takes to go from limbic to rational with one thing, and that is empathy. Okay, so it's any kind of human connection or warmth that you can offer. If in the midst of a fight you can somehow just say, I can see you're really upset, I'm sorry, let's talk about this, I really care about you, I really care about this, so let's not walk away from it. Okay, so it's just something that creates closeness and understanding and connection through empathy. Okay, that can really short circuit the reaction and help you both come back from that heightened hyperactive part of your brain, so you can talk about the issue again calmly. Okay, so the next bucket of gas is we can expect the worst or we can believe the best. And this is kind of a trained thing, and a learned behavior. Our instinct is to expect the worst, but we can retrain our brains to believe the best. There's one thing that I always tell my couples that I work with, and in fact, I write it down on the board so that they can visualize it. Sometimes they take a picture of it, they can internalize it and remember it. And it's this: always believe that your spouse is doing the best they can with the tools that they have at any given moment. Okay, that's really important. This is something that we need to train our brains to do. Our go-to first should always be to believe the best possible thing about our spouse. Now, sometimes they could be insensitive. They might say something hurtful, inappropriate, and in those times, there's definitely a need to have a conversation about that. But our first instinct, really, our first reaction should be to think the best, believe the best. What's the best possible explanation for that thing he said, or that thing that she did. So go there first until you find out differently, and then you can talk about that. Right? Does that make sense? I think, yeah. It's really a skill we learn and develop over time, and we can choose it, right? I mean, we do have control over this. There are some things we don't have control over, but that's one of them, and it saves so much trouble in our marriage and conflict. So believe the best instead of the worst. So the next one, I think, win, lose. That every conflict is going to end. If you think that every conflict is going to end with winning and you win, or someone winning and someone losing, that is gas, right? That's a bucket of gas. A bucket of water is if we think win-win, right? So imagine thinking win-win. Marriage is the only game where you can both win or you both lose, right? Unless there's a tie. Is that a winning? Or okay? Anyway, um, um, you know, and anyway, who wants to be married to a loser, right? Nobody wants to marry to a loser. You want to be married to a winner. So we need to be able to create a, a situation in which both are winning. Okay, we really need to figure that out. So that's a bucket of water. The next one, gas makes it personal, water focuses on the issue. So here's the difference. With water, one of you might say, it frustrates me when you don't call me when you're going to be late for dinner. The food gets cold, I get hungry, or the kids get cranky and I'm upset, it will be so helpful if you just can call us and let you know that you're going to be late, right? That's a bucket of water. On the other hand, a bucket of gas would be, you're so thoughtless. You're so disrespectful. You're so irresponsible when you forget to call. You don't care about me. You don't care about the kids. You just think you're just so selfish. You're just like your father, right? You've heard that before. So you see the difference? It can get real personal real quick. And that's a bucket of gas. And that conflict explodes because now, even though it's a legitimate complaint, it's a legitimate issue, we're going after the person's character now, right? We're focusing on the character, not the behavior. Okay, so that's really, we need to really be really mindful of that. Gas keeps track of every wrong ever done. And when you need some ammo, you just pull it out and say, remember when you did that, and remember when you said that. Water is different. Water is not keeping score. We need to learn when the issue has been dealt with, forgiven, it's over, it's in the past, it's never going to come out again. It's dead and buried, right? So gas is really being defensive. When something comes up, we start getting defensive, right? One of the four horsemen. Water is learning how to be humble, right? And that's a lifelong kind of learning process. Maybe your partner may have a point, maybe there's something to learn here. Maybe I could try to see it their way. So take a look at this video about, oh, I won't tell you what it's about. Take a look at this video.
Again, this is the USS Montana requesting that you immediately divert your course 15 degrees to the north to avoid a collision. Over.
Please divert your course 15 degrees to the south to avoid collision.
This is Captain Hancock. You will divert your course. Over.
Negative, Captain. I'm not moving anything. Change your course. Over.
Son, this is the USS Montana, the second largest vessel in the North Atlantic Fleet. You will change course 15 degrees north, or I will be forced to take measures to ensure the safety of this ship. Over.
This is the lighthouse, mate. It's your call. Hello?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we really need to humble ourselves. The lesson here is if we don't, and if we're not willing to change our course, we will collide. And who wins, right? For the masters of marriage, they have a conflict, right? There's a conflict that exists. They have a spark. They choose the water, and they humble themselves. A great verse to live by, which has a lot of wisdom, is 1 Peter 5, 5 and 6. God gives grace to the humble and he resists the proud. Therefore, humble yourselves under the mighty hand of God, and he may exalt you in due time. I'm sure we don't want God resisting us. That's not what we want. I'm sure we want our prayers to be answered. So if we humble ourselves, God will give us our desires and lift us in our faith and in our marriage. Okay, so let's move on. Two more. We have the spark. We have a potential conflict on our hands. Hiddenness will just make things worse. That's a bucket of gas. But being honest, on the other hand, is a bucket of water. You might say, when that happened, I was really hurt. So just, that's really important that you're honest. Don't hide it. Don't keep it to yourself. Don't store it away. Don't assume that you can get over it on your own. Simple honesty saying, that's an issue. I think we need to talk about this, and this is the way I felt about it or I feel about it. Honesty builds trust. Okay. So, last one, when difficult things happen and conflict comes, a spark comes, right? We know that. Stonewalling is a bucket of gas. Now, sometimes we stonewall because we're just overwhelmed with our emotions. And stonewalling, again, is one of the four horsemen. We don't know how to deal with our partner. Um, but the one thing that we shouldn't do is stonewall. And it's one of the, again, it's a key behavior, as Gottman says, of couples that don't make it. Whenever things get heated, one partner stonewalls and just goes silent or refuses to engage, and may even resort like to even a silent treatment um, at times. Um, and it's one, again, it's one of the predictors of divorce that we want to stay away from. Um, so remember the correlation between the habitual avoidance of conflict and divorce, right? Stonewalling is highly correlated with marriages that avoid conflict and don't make it. So conversely, that last point underwater is engage, and this is going to be, I mean, this is what it's going to look like. Maybe um, um, you can tell your partner that the conversation is difficult for you, or you foresee that it's going to be difficult. But honey, I trust you. I love you. Let's deal with it. Let's talk about it, and that's a bucket of water. And that calms the fire down so that we can deal with issues that we need to deal with. So that's the list of some very common behaviors that can inflame or a spark or put out a spark with water. I'm wondering which ones are true for you in your marriage or with you. So in the your turn exercise on page 5, yeah, page 5, put a check mark by any of those that are true for you, right? Just be honest, right? Hopefully you can check some on both sides. So I'll leave this up to you. It's your turn. So just working on your own right now. You don't need to compare. It's just on your own. Okay. So you'll have a minute. Okay. So let's move on and continue with our forest fire imagery. So does anyone know how some of the ways, why forest fires start? Does anyone have any ideas? I mean, we talked about some already, but um, any thoughts? Lightning, careless campers, um, natural causes, some of those things. So normally the policy for a lot of these, I guess, national parks and whatever is just to let, like we said, some of these things, little small fires burn out. But the problem arises when there is a lot of fuel that's accumulated in the forest floor due to different things like insects can do that, drought, various natural occurrences. So if they don't practice like deliberate controlled fires or controlled burns, it can become a real hazard. So what happens is that all of this creates a perfect storm, so perfect conditions for a major forest fire. So it doesn't take a whole lot of a fire to create a huge problem. So if we relate this to marriage, if we've got a lot of unresolved issues, if we've got a lot of fuel under our rug, right? It doesn't take much of a spark to have a huge problem. In fact, you may have noticed that sometimes you may get into a huge fight over basically a small issue. And you can probably guess that it's not about the issue, it's about the fuel that has built up over time, right? In fact, I was watching a little, it was oh, I forget who the interviewer was, but anyway, it was a little clip where Dr. John Gottman was asked, what do couples argue about? And he says, they actually argue about nothing, right? Sometimes it's nothing, and then this nothing becomes something really big because of the underlying emotions and the meaning that we draw from what is being argued about, or even the process. We are even argue about the process. No, I didn't say that. Yes, you did say that. Well, you talked for 5 minutes and you don't let me talk. You keep interrupting me. Why did you? By the time you're done, you don't even know what you're arguing about. So we need to look at where the fuel is coming from. What are the back issues? What's the history? What's the backstory? Because that fire sometimes should not really come out of that spark. That doesn't make any sense sometimes. So the goal is not to let fuel accumulate, right? So how do we do that? Well, there's a couple of things. First of all, there's 3 tools to get rid of fuel. Okay, the first one is, let's see, page 6. We need to practice the wisdom on page 6 by Doctors Les and Leslie Parrott. They say that conflict is the price smart couples pay for intimacy. Okay. So what we're saying here is maybe you have some control burns once in a while. If something is really an issue between you and your spouse, talk about it when it's still small, right? That's the control burn. It makes a lot of sense. If you've prayed about it, if you tried to let it go and it continues to be an issue, you're encouraged to be honest and just say, honey, we just need to talk about whatever issue, because it's still bugging me a little bit, and it's still on my mind, and I don't want it to come between us. So can we just talk about that, or whatever language you want to use, right? So we need to have somewhat of a control burn, because that can help fuel not accumulate. And then we need to deal with issues as soon as they come up. Try not to let them go by more than a week, as a rule of thumb. Okay. And then the third tool is the last 10%. And I really like this concept, because I've been guilty of this many times until I started to understand this. Sometimes when we're having a conversation with our partner and it's a little awkward or tense or even a bit painful, and we tend to stop short of getting it done, like getting it resolved. And so just ask yourself, is there another 10% here? Is there something that I'm holding back? It's been kind of awkward, and I'm a little hurt, but I don't want to hurt my partner anymore. So you kind of just drop the subject and move on. But what we know is that if you don't do that, or if you don't do that 10%, you're going to be back there again, right? It'll come up again. It'll revisit you again. So because that 10% is often the thing that needs to kind of just make things fall into place, and actually, you start to lay the issue to rest, we really need to pay attention and go that extra piece, right? And it's hard, but going there, being honest is hard, and it's a tool that we can really that can really help fuel not accumulate. Okay. So did you know that um, uh, the largest forest fire in the US happened at Yellowstone National Park, and it started in June of 88 and it ended September of that same year. And what finally put out the fire, the media called it an act of God, right? An act of God. And basically what happened is it snowed, which never happens in that part of the world, never happens during that time of year. So what happened was that the snow melted and put the fire, obviously put the fire out. Um, but it's the water from that snow sifted down into the roots of the forest floor, right? Down into the soil. And what happened was that just um, it just kind of started to slowly put things out. Okay. So we know that um, we we know that we can um, sometimes use something like an act of God to put out fires in our own marriage. And I'm going to call forgiveness an act of God because that's what it really is. All right. So let's look at what forgiveness is all about. You can look at it on page 7. Let's see, page 7. Seeking and granting forgiveness. All right, so we're going to go through some of the basics of forgiveness. Forgiveness is one of those things that we all kind of know. We've all practiced at some time or other, but we tend not to know how to do it very well, right? We have the basics, but sometimes there are some elements that we miss. Maybe because we haven't been taught, maybe because we haven't maybe experienced that in our families of origin. Maybe we just simply, just don't have the tools right now. So it is something that we really need to kind of, just looking at the time, we need to focus on. So I'm going to go through very quickly. If you look on page 7, the steps to seeking and granting forgiveness. So the first step is saying that you were wrong, right? Accepting responsibility. It's so critical that you actually verbalize, honey, when I said that, I was wrong. I'm sorry. Before you say that, I was wrong. And this is really a kind of a humbling thing, right? I mean, it's hard sometimes to say I was wrong, especially if we think that we're not 100% wrong. We're maybe only 50% wrong or 20% wrong or 10% wrong. But if you are even if you are only 10% wrong, own that 10%, right? Say, if my percentage was 10%, hey, you know what? I'm really sorry for that, right? Own your stuff. And that's where it starts, really humbling. The next thing is to say, I'm sorry. I was wrong. And the I am sorry, the I am wrong. So that first step, it addresses the behavior, but the I am sorry addresses the relational piece. Okay, that's the relational piece. It's not just the behavior that was bad, you also hurt your partner. And so the relational, emotional component needs to be addressed in the apology, right? I was wrong, I'm sorry. And then the third is, I'm going to try never to do that again, right? It's really important that if you're really seeking forgiveness, you need to say, to the best of my ability, as God gives me strength, I am going to try not to do this again. and it's really not hard. Sorry, it's really hard to take an apology seriously if you don't actually say that I'm going to try not to do that again. So I think that it goes with, a genuine seeking of forgiveness, that this particular piece, number three. Um, we need to be gracious to one another because we all have chronic behaviors that we're trying to improve. So, um, and then the fourth thing is be willing to ask for forgiveness, right? Um, there is something powerful in the words that we use. I was wrong. I'm sorry. I'm going to try to never do that again. Will you please forgive me? Such a powerful, restorative thing to say, to actually use those words. And sometimes we don't do that. Sometimes we'll I'll just buy some flowers and she'll know that I'm sorry, or I'll just be super nice to him and he'll know that I'm sorry, and that just doesn't cut it. In fact, once I work with couples in this, seeking and granting forgiveness, and I remember it got to a certain point where they were ready to go to this step, and the husband started to ask, and of course we had already gone through these elements, but he asked for forgiveness. I didn't hear the word. They did it private, between sessions, and so they came back and they said, you know what, I didn't accept his apology. He said to me that he was sorry if I felt um, hurt by his behavior, if I felt hurt by his behavior. So somehow it's her fault because she's really sensitive. And I talked to my friend so and so, and he said, I really didn't have anything to be sorry for, but I want to go ahead and do it anyway. So, well, she did not accept his apology, and to this date, he has not. Now he has to apologize for the apology. So, and then go back and start all over again. So there are some steps to doing this. We don't want to make it mechanical, but we need to have these elements in our apology. And if you need to post it on your fridge and use it, because really it's a daily thing. Okay. Now the other piece is granting forgiveness. And there's some steps there too. But we need to start by understanding that we're not necessarily endorsing or condoning or accepting the bad behavior. We want to acknowledge the bad behavior. We want to say it out loud. We're not doormats. We don't accept unhealthy behavior from our partners when we forgive them. That's not the point of forgiveness. When forgiveness is honestly being sought, though, we want the relationship to come back together in reconciliation. It is our responsibility and the response that we would grant forgiveness, which is super hard to do. We hold on to the right to be hurt, right? We hold on to grudge as long as we can. So it's hard to give that up. And we need to be willing, however, to give it up in order to strengthen the relationship. And that's a hard thing to do, which leads us to our first point. Ask God for help. So do it internally first. And as Christians, we have access to God, to a God that actually helps us change our hearts, right? Change our heart, oh God. I can't tell you how many times I have had to ask God to change my heart and for me to be open to forgive. And that is a really important step. And then it's do it specifically. When we grant forgiveness, name it. Yes, I forgive you for saying those things, but it hurt me. It broke my heart to hear you say those things, but I forgive you, and we need to be very specific about what we're forgiving and do it generously. We have been forgiven. We know what it's like to be forgiven, both by our partners in the past. We can remember when they have said, I forgive you. And so we have to be able to put ourselves in their shoes, right? And say, I've done that before and you forgave me and I really need to forgive you too. And so we can't really hold on to those feelings. We need to remember a time in which we have been forgiven, which as Christians, we have had so many opportunities to know what it feels like to be forgiven, to be released to have a burden lifted off our shoulders, and so we need to do that for our spouse generously. And then we need to do it over and over again, right? It's a daily thing. We need to forgive. We sin daily, we forgive daily. And it doesn't mean that we accept, again, that we accept bad behavior, but we need to be able to almost have it at the tip of our tongue, ready, right? Um, so this is the piece about forgiveness. And we got to remember that we can't keep a list of wrongs, right? That we pull out whenever it's time. Once things are forgiven, just like God does with us, we have to it just goes into another another category, and it stays there, right? We don't get it, we don't pick it up again. Forgiveness puts out fires, right? And we don't we don't need our lists anymore. We don't need to hold on to that. We can just get rid of that. Um, a lack of forgiveness, on the other hand, keeps fires burning and keeps embers, under the rug or underneath the surface so hot sometimes. So the next time there's a spark, even if it's a really tiny thing, it will just flare up again. So we really need to be very careful about that. So a happy marriage is the union of two good forgivers, right? So you only have two choices in marriage. Either you never make a mistake, or you learn to forgive, right? Never make a mistake, or learn to be a great forgiver. So there'll be moments of conflict. And I read this, that if you are, the acronym HALT, if you are hungry, angry, lonely, or tired, it's not the right time to resolve conflict, right? So be very mindful of that. If you're hungry, angry, lonely, or tired, don't try to start a hard, a difficult discussion. Okay, so let's see. Oh, the other thing I wanted to mention, that it's the masters of marriage are those people, and I think I've mentioned this before, that shorten the time between the time that you have a conflict and the time that you resolve that conflict, or you talk about it, as well as the time that you ask for forgiveness and the time that forgiveness is granted. And that's a really good measure to know where you're at in your marriage. Not how much conflict you have, but that time that's now starting to shorten. So we're going to end today's session now, and we're going to just have a quick conversation between the two of you. So basically, we want you to do a forensic audit on a conflict that you've had in the past. So not something active. We don't want you to argue about it now. Something that's been in the past. The instructions are on page 8. And I want you to learn something by dissecting your past conflict. So these are the elements or things that you are going to include in your conversation. How did it happen? What were the sparks? What buckets did we use? Gas or water? What did we do well? What didn't do so well? What could we have done differently in this situation? Is the fire out now? Have we resolved it? And have we asked for and granted forgiveness? So I'm going to give you 4 minutes, and then we'll come back and we'll do, if you have any questions, we can go straight into that. Okay, we're back, I think. Oops.